Welcome to Cast Pulse. I'm Carlos Beck-Viana, Director of Marketing and Communications at Cast, and this is Episode 9. Seed oils, canola, corn, soybean, and others are among the most consumed edible oils in the United States and around the world. In recent years, they've become one of the most debated topics in nutrition, with strong opinions on both sides and a lot of conflicting information circulating online. To help make sense of it, Cast's Program Engagement Manager, Kaylee Kleitsch, sat down with Joy Dobbins, a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator, and Messina, a senior research fellow at Soy Nutrition Institute Global, who has spent decades studying soy foods and soybean oil. Here's that conversation.
First and foremost, can you guys please introduce yourselves to our audience?
My name's Joy Dobbins. I'm a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes educator and the host of the Sound Bites podcast, which has been out for a little over 11 years. And my audience is a mix of the general public, but also health professionals, especially registered dietitians.
And I'm Messina. I'm a senior research fellow with Soy Nutrition Institute Global. And I think that senior it really characterizes my current state. But I've been focused on understanding the health effects of soy foods and soybean components such as isoflavones, soybean oil, soy protein, really my entire career beginning in the early 1990s.
Amazing. Well, we are very excited to have both of you here today to talk about a very hot topic, one that seems to only be getting warmer as we go forward, seed oils. So when a lot of people hear the word or the term seed oils, they often think of cooking oils, trending health debates. From your perspectives, what would you define seed oils as, and where do they fit into the broader agricultural and food landscape?
Well, let me just jump in here, Melissa, and then you can take over. But I think an important point is to emphasize that this isn't really a term that I think anybody used. I have seen it in the literature in older studies, but it wasn't part of nutrition lexicon until a few years ago, actually. The term that was used was vegetable oils. And as it turns out, seed oils is a pretty common usage now, and it's a subset of vegetable oils. So it's oils that are produced from seeds, such as soybeans and corn, peanuts, as opposed to from fruit oils, such as avocados or palm oil. So there is this distinction now, and it's interesting. I think the fact that it is such a commonly used term illustrates the extent to which this controversy has become mainstream.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. As a dietitian in communications, I'm always looking to see what are the trending topics, and both in, like on social media and then in my dietitian circles, the seed oils kept cropping up. And I'm like, what are seed oils? And as Mark said, I'm like, oh, they're just vegetable oils. And I think that to Mark's point, that was a big sort of eye-opener for me. Like, okay, we've got like this new term that we're dealing with that as a dietitian wasn't even, I've been a dietitian for over 30 years. It just wasn't even something that was on my radar. So I think, that's something to note. And then also, because it's such a hot topic and we have to look at, the dialogue on social media, traditional media as well. We know that people are getting their health and nutrition information from their peers and their family members, more so than mainstream science community, that it's really important to really understand and appreciate that we're really in an environment now that there's a lot of lack of trust in science, and regardless of the topic. And we've got all these influencers, and these influencers are really drowning out a lot of the credible voices in the space. And there's a lot of challenges that credible health professionals have in communicating evidence-based information. I like to cite this one survey because it really illustrates my point. A few years ago, actually, yeah, not too long ago, a couple years ago, there was a survey on TikTok conducted by MyFitnessPal and Dublin City University, and they evaluated like over 65,000 videos specifically about food. They excluded dietitian influencers, but long and the short of it is they found that only about 2% of that content was accurate and aligned with public health nutrition guidelines. So I think that, we really need to kind of start from there as far as understanding like what is being said about seed oils and just those challenges therein.
That 2%, that's higher than I would have thought, actually. But it is interesting because I mentioned at the onset that I've been focused on soybeans, soy foods, and soybean components such as protein, isoflavones, and soybean oil. But I really hadn't spent much time with soybean oil because there wasn't that much to research, because it was generally accepted that oils such as soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, oils that are high in linoleic acid, the omega-6 essential fatty acid, were good for your heart and perhaps exerted other benefits as well. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I began to notice, as Melissa was talking about, a lot of very influential social media influencers, especially those folks who tend to promote a carnivore diet, started talking about the harmful effects of seed oils, literally blaming seed oils on all of the non-communicable diseases that we face in this country: obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart disease. So I ended up writing a paper on soybean oil about, I think it was published maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So it's only been in the last 5 years that I've really began to focus on seed oils or vegetable oils. And there's just a wealth of information. And this is one of the, I think, rare instances where the controversy is about one side saying something is harmful and the other side saying it's actually beneficial. So it's a 180 difference. Usually when there's a controversy, it might be, well, something is harmful, other people think it's safe, or some people think something is beneficial and other people aren't so sure. In this case, the concerns about seed oils are absolutely diametrically opposed to all of the recommendations from established health and nutrition organizations, not just in this country like the American Heart Association, but throughout the world.
So how do you think that contributes to a lot of the dialogue that's being had? And when you hear this dialogue, both from, informal media, social media, and formal media sources, what do you think is kind of the most confusing, the most potentially harmful to the general public and their understanding of seed oils?
I think what Mark said is the most confusing and most harmful, that despite the claims that there are negative impacts, the science shows that there are actually benefits to it, to the seed oils. And Mark can get into maybe a little bit more of the science. But I did want to mention, I wrote a 3,000-word article for dietitians, a continuing education article, where I had to take quite a deep dive, and it's got like 40 citations to it. And I also did a presentation at our annual nutrition conference on it. And what I learned in the process is like, well, why is this even an issue? What's the motivation behind this? Why is it bubbling up? And we're not really sure, I guess I would say. But one of the things that kept cropping up was this seed oils association with ultra processed foods. And that, I think, is like guilt by association. And ultra processed foods could be an entirely different podcast episode. But I did want to touch on that briefly because I do think that that's where a lot of the criticism might lie. Processed foods and ultra processed foods have been getting a lot of hate lately. And there's this classification system called NOVA. But interestingly, seed oils themselves are not ultra processed, but they can be in ultra processed foods. So I think it's maybe important to step back a little bit and say, like, what are some common seed oils? Like, what are they? Canola, corn, soybean. There's also cottonseed, grapeseed, rice bran, safflower, and sunflower, but also things like chia seed, flaxseed, hemp, and others are quote unquote seed oils. So, we use those in cooking, and they can also be used in baking, but they can also be found in many common prepared foods like salad dressings, chips, and crackers. So I think it's important to kind of explain that basic information. And again, like if people are freaking out about ultra processed foods, I think that's one of the reasons that seed oils have come under fire. And Mark can speak more to that too.
Well, it's absolutely correct. But sometimes it's like blaming water for the harmful effects of sugar sweetened beverages. I mean, so oils, the seed oils themselves are quite healthful. And in fact, they are typically most connected with cardiovascular disease in terms of reducing risk. The American Heart Association published a meta-analysis, a statistical analysis of randomized controlled trials several years ago. And they found when you look at the longer-term trials that replacing saturated fat in the diet, which is typically found, of course, in animal foods, with polyunsaturated fat, which is the main type of fat in seed oils, there's about a 30% reduction in risk of cardiovascular disease, which the American Heart Association equated that with the effect of statins. And what's interesting also is that as more and more research has been published on these oils, we're learning that they, in addition to reducing cardiovascular disease risk, they reduce certain forms of cancer, diabetes, reduce liver fat, even improve cognitive function. I have a paper that's being reviewed at the moment. It's a co-authored paper where we're looking at the potential benefits of seed oils independent of cardiovascular disease. And just one other quick comment in response to your question. As Melissa pointed out, most people get their information from social media these days, and these social media influencers have had a big impact on people's perception of seed oils, and in fact, their comments have resulted in legislative action, anti-seed oil legislative action occurring in some U.S. states. But just from a personal perspective, I was with my sister and her children on vacation a couple of years ago, and we rented a cabin, and there was canola oil in the cupboard, which is a seed oil, very healthy oil, and she wouldn't consume it because of what she learned from social media, and she went out and bought olive oil. And this is, her brother gives presentations on this topic, but she was absolutely convinced. So,
yeah, a lot of fear factor going on there. And that's one of the things as science researchers, health professionals, we really want to help people make well-informed decisions based on facts and not fear. And I like to say we want to help people enjoy their food with health in mind. And like, what do you worry about and what do you not worry about?
Yeah, I think if you look at the basis for the concerns about seed oils, it's really pretty simple to summarize. First of all, they'll argue that these oils were not historically consumed, that they're a relatively new addition to our diet. And to some extent, that's very, very true, except for sesame oil, and peanut oil has been around for a long time. But things like soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, they're relatively new. And then they look at that and they link the introduction of seed oils to sort of the diets of high-income countries like the United States with the rise in rates of obesity and diabetes and a few other diseases. And they assume that association has a causal basis, whereas we all recognize, of course, there are many changes that have occurred during the past 50 or 60 years when seed oils have risen in popularity. And what you really want to understand is not whether countries that consume more seed oils have higher rates of a particular disease, but whether people in those countries who consume more or less seed oils have higher or lower rates of chronic disease. And when you look at those studies, it's overwhelmingly consistent. Most of the time in nutrition and diet and health, there's a lot of inconsistent data because it's hard to do these studies. But in the case of seed oils and linoleic acid, which is the, again, essential omega-6 essential fatty acid found in seed oils. Most of the seed oils are at least 50% linoleic acid. When you look at linoleic acid intake, blood levels of linoleic acid, or even adipose tissue content, which is a better indicator of long-term exposure, you see higher exposure to linoleic acid is inversely related to a range of chronic diseases. And then just finally, the main sort of mechanistic basis for, at least by the anti-seed oil folks, is that these seed oils, because they're high in linoleic acid, increase inflammation. And that's something I learned when I was in school, and perhaps Melissa did as well. And there was this belief that in your body, linoleic acid would be converted to another fatty acid, 20 carbons in length, the arachidonic acid. And from there, you would produce metabolites that would have pro-inflammatory effects. But now we've known this for 15 years now, we now understand that when you consume linoleic acid, it's really not converted to arachidonic acid in your body. And even if it was, many of the metabolites of arachidonic acid have both anti and pro-inflammatory effects. So what you really need to look at, it's not sort of mechanistic speculation. You actually want to look at what happens when you feed people seed oils or when you record the dietary intake of people. And those studies, both the clinical trials and the observational studies, show seed oils offer a number of health benefits.
Absolutely.
Let me say that's a really good thing, because seed oils play a huge role in the global and U.S. food supply. And in fact, soybean oil accounts for over 7% of our total caloric intake. So soybean oil is the main seed oil consumed in this country, second most. Well, it's the first seed oil consumed in the world, but it's right behind palm oil in terms of total consumption on a global basis. So it's good that these seed oils provide health benefits. And soybean oil actually is responsible for about 40% of our intake of both essential fatty acids, linoleic acid and omega-6 fatty acid, and then alpha-linolenic acid and omega-3 fatty acid. I think it would actually be difficult for us to meet our requirements for omega-3 fatty acids without the use of soybean oil.
Yeah, Mark, you may have touched on this, but if not, or if you just touched on it briefly, I think it would be important to talk a little bit more about these essential fatty acids, because I don't, even as a dietitian, sometimes it's like, I got to think through this, but also some of the health benefits from these polyunsaturated fatty acids are seen and encouraged to replace the saturated fats in our diets. So maybe you could speak to that.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. First of all, again, there's only 2 essential fatty acids. We often talk a lot about the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids in fish oils, DHA and EPA, and they're very, very important, but they're actually not essential, because you can convert the omega-3 essential fatty acid, linolenic acid, which is in soybean oil, nuts, flaxseed, into these longer-chain omega-3 fatty acids, although the conversion is not very robust. So I think it is a good idea personally to consume some of these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. If you don't want to consume fish because you're concerned about mercury, you can actually get the omega-3 fatty acids in supplement form from algae, and that's where the fish get it. So you might as well just go right to the source. And as Melissa indicated, in diet, when you eat something, you're not eating something else. It's always about, if not this, then what? And in this case, you don't want to just start, drinking a bottle of vegetable oil or seed oil. You want to replace the sources of saturated fat in your diet with these polyunsaturated fats. And there's been a lot of debate about whether monounsaturated fats, like you would find in olive oil, are superior to the polyunsaturated fats like you find mostly in seed oils. And there was a great study from Harvard involving almost about 200,000 individuals, men and women. And they found that if you replace 5% of your energy from saturated fat with 5% of your energy from refined carbohydrate, your risk of heart disease actually increases because you don't really want to be consuming a lot of refined carbohydrate. If you replace saturated fat with carbohydrate from whole grains, whole foods, your risk goes down 9%. If you replace saturated fat with monounsaturated fat, it goes down 15%, which is pretty impressive. But if you replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat, it went down 25%.
Yeah, that's huge.
And then the other issue often that comes up is oxidation, because these linoleic acid and as well as the omega-3 fatty acids have multiple double bonds as opposed to monounsaturated fat, which only has one double bond, and saturated fat doesn't have a double bond. Those double bonds are susceptible to being oxidized. So there was a concern that if you consume too much of these polyunsaturated fats, that you would cause oxidative stress in your body, and oxidative stress is like inflammation, underlies a lot of the chronic diseases. It's part of the etiology of chronic diseases. But it turns out that when you consume these polyunsaturated fats, oxidative stress does not go up. And one of my all-time favorite quotes is from Martha Belluri from Ohio State. She is a fatty acid expert. You want really in-depth knowledge about fatty acids, you should invite her on your podcast. But she once said that we are not a bottle of vegetable oil. So the oils themselves can oxidize, but when you consume the vegetable oil or the seed oil, you're not causing this oxidation process in your body. So I think it's important to emphasize that it's a good idea when you're buying vegetable oils or seed oils to keep the lid tightly closed so it's not exposed to oxygen, keep it in a dark location, away from sunlight, and preferably to buy an amount that you can consume in a relatively short period of time, in a couple of months, as opposed to a year or longer. And sometimes I get a little nervous when I see people going to the box stores and they're coming out with jugs of this stuff. I don't know, maybe they own a store or something, or they have a really large family. But if they don't, that bottle is probably going to be around for a while. And actually, as a result of listening to a food science expert, I actually now keep my vegetable oils or seed oils in the refrigerator, so to prevent any chance of the oils being oxidized.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Both of you touched on it a little bit, but building off of, average American family, what they're doing with seed oils in the kitchen. First, how do you think that seed oils really play into the average American's diet? And secondly, there's been a lot of talk about, cutting seed oils out completely. Is that feasible with the system that we have right now?
Mm-hmm. I don't think so. As Mark said, or alluded to, seed oils are the number one consumed vegetable oils, seed oils are the number one consumed edible oils in the U.S., particularly soybean oil, which, by the way, if you go to the grocery store and you see a bottle of vegetable oil, is typically soybean oil. And I think he said, it's like 7% of our caloric intake. When I wrote my paper, I looked at, if you're not using seed oils, what would you use instead? And we're looking at like olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil. There's a lot of different quote unquote alternatives, but there's pros and cons with a lot of those, especially price. Seed oils are much more affordable than avocado oil. Something like a coconut oil has more saturated fat in it, which we don't want. We want the polyunsaturated and the monounsaturated fats over the saturated fats in our diet. So I think just from a practical standpoint, there's that. Interestingly, there was a survey. I was kind of encouraged by this information I'm going to share with you. The International Food Information Council did a survey on seed oils in February of 2025. And some of the insights that I found encouraging were these. 3 in 4 people surveyed are at least somewhat familiar with the term seed oils, and nearly half believe that seed oils are healthy. Most of the people surveyed cited the sources of information about seed oils that they seek are friends, family, and social media. Most people say what they've heard is positive, and more than 7 in 10 do not actively avoid seed oils. So I love these consumer insights because we see all of this stuff in the media and the social media, and we need to kind of take a step back sometimes and think about what are real people really worried about and really questioning in their daily lives, which isn't to say we don't need to worry about the misinformation and the dialogue out there about seed oils. As health and nutrition communicators, we need to constantly be putting out solid evidence-based information so that it's there when people seek it. But again, maybe we don't need to panic in that respect. And then in addition to some of the storage stuff that Mark had, before we wrap up, I can share some more practical tips and takeaways for our listeners.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're obviously a half full kind of person, because I look at those results and I say, I think you said maybe a little bit more than half believe seed oils are healthful. And I'm thinking, why isn't that like 95%?
Right. It's true, Mark. You know me too well.
Again, this is, I actually think this controversy is going to be resolved. I think 3 or 4 years from now, we're not going to be talking about seed oils like we are today and have been over the past couple of years, because the evidence is so overwhelming. Again, randomized controlled trials and observational studies, and just literally, I'm not exaggerating. Probably every other day, I get a new study that supports the benefits of seed oils. So I think that information is slowly making its way into the mainstream, because again, a lot of the information directly undermines the claims being made by the anti-seed oil people. And I've actually seen some of those folks starting to maybe change their perspective a little bit on seed oils. Again, seed oils do play a huge role in our diet, but we don't want to be frying foods, regardless of it's with beef tallow, as some people would suggest, or soybean oil. Frying it lightly and a little bit is absolutely fine, but you don't want to be deep frying anything and eating fried foods on a regular basis. And just one other point, like about olive oil, it's a very healthful oil if you get the virgin olive oil, which is expensive, and it also has a pretty distinctive taste. And one of the selling points of many of the seed oils, like corn oil and safflower oil and soybean oil, is that they have a neutral taste and a pretty high smoke point.
Yeah, extra virgin olive oil actually is what you would need. All of the research, shouldn't say all, but from my understanding, because I did a recent episode on extra virgin olive oil, is the research that shows the benefits of olive oil is on extra virgin olive oil. So there is a distinction there. And yes, to your point about the neutral taste. And I would say as a dietitian, there's a big difference between sauteing and roasting your vegetables in or even making a salad dressing in seed oils versus consuming chips and cookies and other, processed, I'll call them indulgent foods that are made with seed oils. But again, not that the seed oils are the problem in that, but, again, if people are thinking, oh, I want to eat more healthfully, we know that we need more fruits and vegetables in our diet. And most people aren't just going to eat plain raw vegetables or plain steamed vegetables. And so using some oil in the sauteing or the roasting or salad dressing can really help encourage those foods that we aren't getting enough of.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out before we end is that the seed oils, vegetable oils, do have a qualified health claim approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for their role in reducing risk of heart disease because of their ability to lower cholesterol levels when replacing saturated fat in the diet. So that includes canola, corn, and soybean oil. Now, olive oil has one also, but interestingly, the language in support, especially for soybean oil, the language in support of the potency or the efficacy for reducing risk of heart disease is much more supportive for soybean oil than seed oils than it actually is for olive oil.
Glad you brought that up. I was gonna bring that up. Kaylee, I don't mean to like be the interviewer in this. I was gonna say, Mark, talk about the qualified health claims, or is
Yeah,
it's a qualified
and
health claim,
again,
right?
as I mentioned it very briefly, I think that we need to expand our perspective on the role that seed oils can have in a healthy diet, because there's some pretty intriguing evidence that if you can when you replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat, that you reduce liver fat content or prevent liver fat accumulation. And fatty liver is a huge epidemic in this country because of obesity, but around the world. And Melissa can talk to that because she's an expert on diabetes. So you see this in 10-year-old kids now. And as I was saying, there's evidence that it may improve cognitive function. 7 out of the 8 observational studies that look at the relationship between linoleic acid intake and cognitive function showed a benefit. The other one showed no effect. So I think as time goes on, we're going to be learning more and more about the benefits, not just related to cardiovascular disease.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
Amazing. Well, I know that I've learned a lot during this conversation, listening in on you two. I hope that some of our listeners are able to take some stuff away. Is there anything else that you want to leave folks with as we wrap this conversation up?
I just want to say one thing. Sorry for jumping in, Melissa. Is that again? There's been a lot of talk about the importance of the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. So our ratio is probably 8, 9 to 1, 10 to 1. Some people think our ancestral diet might have been 1 to 1. And when I was going to school, I learned that the lower the ratio, the better. That really started in the late 80s, 1990s. And it was, again, thought that if your ratio was too high, you would have it would be have a pro-inflammatory effect. And we now know for certain that ratio is completely irrelevant. All of the established health organizations, even those who at one point thought the ratio was important, have acknowledged the ratio is not a useful indicator of diet quality. So don't worry about the ratio. Just make sure you get enough of each type of fatty acid, the omega-6 fatty acids, as well as the omega-3 fatty acids.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. And Mark, as always, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I wrote my paper, the data that I saw showed that we were getting about the amount of omega-6s that we need. We are not getting the amount of omega-3s that we need. So, again, this ratio is an outdated concept, but it kind of goes in line with, we do need more omega-3s, but I thought it was very interesting that it's not like we're getting more omega-6s than we need from the research I saw.
Yeah, good point. Related to that is that you can improve your ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 by lowering your omega-6 intake. That's the wrong way to go. You want to improve your ratio by consuming more omega-3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I just have some parting words to, that the health benefits of seed oils are supported by scientific research. Leading health organizations recommend them for their role in reducing the risk of chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. And seed oils provide those both omega-3s, but also the essential omega-6 fatty acids. They're affordable, they're accessible. I've described the ways that they can help you increase your intake of vegetables, which we all need to do for a variety of reasons. And, in addition to some of what Mark said about storing properly to improve or to preserve their quality and taste and stability, keep it in a cool, dark place in the cupboard, use within a few months, maybe up to 6 months, and definitely after 3 to 5 months of opening. So that's what I found in my research when I did my own research. I'm just joking. I didn't do my own research. That was a little inside joke there when I was writing my paper. So I think as the guilt-free RD that I am, I don't want people to have fear of healthy, safe, nutritious foods, and I want people to enjoy their food with health in mind.
That was Melissa Joy Dobbins and Mark Messina, speaking with CAST's Kaylee Kleitsch. If you want to learn more about CAST and the work we do, visit us at cast-science.org. You can also find us on social media. We are at Cast Ag Science on all platforms. Follow Cast Pulse on Spotify so you'll never miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.